Let's take our first look at the Ableton user interface and see where things are located. While we're at it, we'll also talk a bit about how Live provides two different workflows and the versatility and options that offers. So I've got exercise 5 from chapter 1 open. And while we're talking about those two different workflows and the user interface, let me just mention that there are a number of things in the interface that remain constant no matter which of the workflows we're actually working in. And that would include things like the drop-down menus that we have across the top here, and then everything that goes around the edge of the interface. So up here on the control bar, we have things like the tempo and meter and the metronome. In the middle, we've got the transport controls, and we've got the kind of punch in and punch out controls. And over on the right, we have mapping controls as well as a couple of indicators that tell us how the computer CPU is performing, like this one here, and then things to do with MIDI performance over here on the right. Over on the left, we have our browser, and that allows us to locate and find instruments and plugins, loops, one-shot audio files, and even access areas out on our hard drive, like where our folders and files are at. Now, down in the lower left-hand corner, we have Info View, and this is really helpful. Whatever you point your mouse at, it's going to give us a little bit of information about what that thing is. So, for example, if I point my mouse at one of the sends, it's telling us that this adjusts the track's contribution to the corresponding return track. And if I point at one of these gold numbered buttons, it tells us that that's the track activator button, which is essentially works the reverse of a mute button. So when the button is lit and it's gold, we're going to hear the audio from that track, and when it's disabled and grayed out, that track is effectively muted. Continuing, I've got across the bottom here, I've actually got two views. For example, let me click something over here on the drum track. Okay, so right now we're looking at this MIDI clip. So we're in clip view. And if I click the second of these two tabs at the bottom, this switches over and I see the devices that are in use. So right now I'm looking at a drum rack. If I go over to, let's see, this piano track, I don't have any plugins on that. Let's see. For example, on the ugly piano track, I can see the virtual instrument that's here, and then I can see a bunch of signal processors that are in use. And again, if I click the other tab, I can see the MIDI notes that are on that clip. Now, there's one area of the interface that's currently hidden, and we can bring that into view by going up to the View menu and clicking on Help View. And that opens up over here on the right, and this gives us information about Live and access to Live lessons. So I typically work with that closed, so I'll click that X button to do that. Now, while I'm in the upper right-hand corner here, I'll point out these two buttons, and these allow us to switch between the two independent workflows. The one we're looking at now being Session View, and then if I click the top button, that takes me over to Arrange View. Now, our first important key command in Live is the Tab key, because the Tab key will move us between those two views. So Arrangement View that we're looking at now is the workflow that's similar to probably what you're used to if you've been working in GarageBand, Logic, Pro Tools, Cubase, or all of the many other DAWs. In that, Arrangement View is a linear way of working with our clips. And so time starts on the left, and we can see that there's a ruler up top here that starts at bar 1, and it's going to a higher bar number as we move right, or we're going later into the project. And if I want to hear something on one track with something on another track, I have to have content on those two tracks that are lined up on the timeline. So for example, if I start playback here at verse 1, I'm going to hear this clip with these other clips that are on the same place on the timeline. So this is a normal linear workflow. Now, some other things that are a little bit different about Arrangement View here is that unlike most programs that put the track controls over on the left-hand side, in Ableton, the track controls in Arrangement View are on the right-hand side. So we see our tracks up here at the top, and we see some return tracks down here at the bottom. And right now I've got this track height a little bit taller, and also you can see that these unfold buttons have been clicked as well. So if I want to see more detail on a track, I can click one of those unfold buttons, and then if necessary, I can move my cursor to the bottom of the track and then click and drag to increase the area that I'm able to see in the header of that track or in the detail that I'm able to see out here on the timeline. Now, just a quick overview. I mentioned the track activator button. Next to that, I've got the solo and record enable buttons for the track. And then instead of having a fader to control that track volume, in arrangement view, we just have a field, and I can change the track volume by clicking and dragging in that field. Next to that, we've got the pan knob. And then below that, I have the 3 sends that correspond with these 3 return tracks down here. Now, while we're looking at this track, I'll point out that we also have these 3 show hide buttons that control how much detail we're seeing here in the track header. So if I click the top one, I can now see the I/O on the track. So I've got my inputs and outputs. And the other buttons here that we'll use a lot would include the return track button or returns. So that's the R button, and you'll notice that these tracks are hidden when I disable that. And then also the mixer button, which takes away all of these controls like our track volume and panning and whatnot. All right, let's flip back over to session view and let's talk about that. So this is one of the really innovative features of Live that's quite different than other programs. And you'll notice here that we don't have a ruler across the top, and that working with content in this view is done in a nonlinear fashion. So I just have on each track these places that I can put clips. And a clip in Ableton Live is a bit of content, and it's either going to be a bit of MIDI or it's going to be a bit of audio. And these can be of virtually any length, but they're often in the 1, 2, 4, or 8 bars in length. And you'll notice that each one of these clips has a play button on it. So if I want to hear that clip played, all I need to do is click the launch button on the clip. Now, I need to make sure that I'm playing here in this view. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this square button over here on the master track, which is the Stop All Clips button. And when I do that, it kind of signifies to Ableton that we're working in session view. So now if I click on, let's say, the chorus drums part, I can hear the playback of that clip. Now, I stop the playback by clicking on one of the stop buttons that are available. Now, right now, because this track is selected and we see that the record button is enabled, all of the other square buttons that we see on the other track here have turned into record buttons to record clips. So there's one on the track down here at the bottom that allows us to stop a clip from playing on that track if we want. Now, if I want to have that clip play with another clip, I just need to click their launch buttons. Okay, so each time I clicked another one of those launch buttons, you might have noticed that it took a little bit of time for that next clip to launch. And that's because all these clips are being synced together using this global quantization amount that's up here. And that basically sets a rule by which when you click launch buttons, how quickly that they will actually launch that clip. Now, right now it's set at 1 bar, which means that when I click one of these, it's going to wait until the beginning of the next bar before it launches. So as I'm working with content and I find things that I want to work together, you'll gradually start to move those clips onto the same row. And you'll notice that over here on the master track, I've also got a launch button, and that allows me to launch all the clips on that row in what is called a scene. And you'll notice that even by what I've named these clips, you can see they're named by sections of songs. So if I want to fire off the second verse, all I need to do is click this launch button. Okay, and I launched a couple of clips there, or I should say scenes, to just demonstrate that the global quantization rule is in effect here as well. So I let this play for 4 bars, and then in the fourth bar, I clicked the launch button for chorus 2, and it waited until the beginning of next bar, and then it launched that next scene. And in that way, we can keep everything kind of organized and synced and playing together. I want to point out that I've been working here in session view, and if I tab to go back over to arrangement view, it's like we've got this curtain that's been pulled across session view. And you'll also notice that we have this orange button that has lit up here. And if I tab back over to session view, you'll see that same button here. Now that button is called the back to arrange button. So if I click that, I'm telling Ableton that now I'm going to be working in arrangement view. And in fact, if I click here on the timeline somewhere and I hit my space bar, we'll hear playback. And here we can actually see the cursor moving on that linear timeline. Now, I'll point out some similarities here. We've got a bunch of show hide buttons here on the left. So if I want to show the I/O or hide it, I can click some of these buttons. And then let me finish by saying that one of the areas that is linked between the two views is this mixer section. So if I grab, for example, this pan knob here and put that back at the center where it's supposed to be, and I tab back over to arrangement view and I look at my drum track, well, it's at center. If I pull it down all the way to the left and tab back over, now I'll see that, yeah, it's all the way to the left on this track. So our volume controls and our panning controls and our activator and the solo and record, all of those are linked between the two views. Otherwise, the content that we see out here on these clip slots and the content that we see here, those are actually independent of each other and allow us two ways of working with the music. Now, when I first started using Ableton Live, one of the things that attracted to me was session view because it was so different. And I found it a really useful way for me to kind of work in the creation phase where I didn't have to have everything lined up on the timeline to experiment and try things together. But I found that as I moved towards kind of completing a project, I liked working in arrangement view and I would move things over there. Then if I wanted to use this content in a live performance, I found that I liked moving it back to session view so that I could trigger the content in conjunction with a live performance by either firing off some clips or using the scenes and the sections of a song so that I could have that kind of dynamic performance where I could choose when things were to occur. I'm fascinated by how other people use live, and I'm frequently surprised by how differently they use session and arrangement views to create a unique workflow that fits their own way of working.